My name is Stella, and I am a widow in my 30s. I am currently facing a problem. 2. Another $100 is gone. I check my wallet over and over. I search thoroughly inside my bag, thinking it might be in there. Yet, I can't find it anywhere. This morning, I withdrew $1,000 for living expenses. It is not a mistake in my memory. I sigh and hold my head. Mother-in-law. My in-laws and I share a common grief and support each other. I became the chief mourner for my husband 3 years ago. He was young when he contracted cancer and passed away quickly. We planned to have a stable life and build a happy family with children, but it was a sudden event. I loved my husband deeply. He was the one who led the shy and nervous me. "Leave it to me," he used to say. Even in his last moments, he said, "I will protect you, leave it to me." Covered in tubes and barely able to open his eyes, my husband was still smiling. Unable to accept his death, I just let the days pass in a life that felt almost not alive. My in-laws shared that pain. They, too, were suffering from the grief of losing their son. At the funeral, my father-in-law quietly muttered with a trembling voice, "Dying before one's parents. What a shameful thing." He bit his lip hard, staring strongly at his son to avoid showing his tears. "Stella, would you like to have dinner together?" "Yes, that sounds good." "You have to eat to keep up your strength." So we naturally came together and lived like animals, huddling together to avoid the cold. The relationship between me and my in-laws was good. Don't hesitate to find a new love. That's right, Stella, you are still young and cute. You can meet someone wonderful. Thank you, but I still love him. We understand. But we'll support you even if you find a new lover. My in-laws are always concerned about me. They seem to feel sorry for me for becoming a widow in my 20s. When I told them I will start job hunting because I can't just be a freeloader, they encouraged me. You don't have to overdo it. I work too, so we should be able to manage as a family. I think he wouldn't have allowed you to start working. My father-in-law smiled slightly sadly. However, after losing my husband, my financial foundation for the future is unstable. Regrettably, I neglected to enroll in insurance, not anticipating that he would contract cancer at a young age. The savings we had slowly accumulated to build a house quickly ran out. Now I rely on a survivor's pension, managing somehow with help from my in-laws, but I can't be complacent with this situation. Therefore, I decided to start a part-time job. I realized the theft a few months after starting the part-time job. I often left my purse on the table, which might be the cause. The theft occurred while I was focused on housework or briefly away in the bathroom. At first it was just a few $10, but gradually the amount and frequency increased to $100, then $200. This situation, where the money I earned kept disappearing, is a serious issue for me who is financially struggling. There are only 3 people in this house, me and my in-laws. Moreover, my father-in-law is away at work during the day. Given the situation, it seemed inevitable for me to think that my mother-in-law was the culprit, but she kindly said, "I'll make dinner tonight so you can relax and enjoy some TV." I did not want to believe that she could do such a thing. I hope she is not the one I prayed. One day I left my purse with $70 and a smartphone recording video on the table. I was hoping something unusual would be captured, but the video clearly showed my mother-in-law taking the bills without hesitation. Perhaps she continues to steal money to maintain herself, I thought. My mother-in-law always speaks to me brightly. Why don't we go shopping for a change? The parfait at that store is popular with young people. Want to try it, she suggested, but it was clear she was forcing herself. After all, she had lost the son she raised. I understand the grief of losing a loved one all too well. Therefore, I could not blame my mother-in-law. Fortunately, I am still in my 20s and have some physical energy left. I'll do what I can until my mother-in-law finally settles down, I thought. For that reason, I decided to increase my part-time work. It was midnight, and my in-laws had gone to bed. I left the house quietly and headed to my new workplace. Working late at night pays well, and this store is just a short walk from my house. It's perfect for earning money. It's mid-November, and the wind in the night sky is starting to feel cold. It will soon be a year since my husband passed away. Come to think of it, I remember how he suddenly suggested, "Shall we go to the store to buy ice cream in the middle of the night?" As we walked down the nighttime street hand in hand, his hand was large and thick and very warm. Although he had become quite thin before he passed away, the warmth of his hand did not change. I put my chilled hands in my pockets and hurried to the store. The store is manned by just 2 people at night, and while there are few customers, it's always busy. As I was checking the expiration date on products, I sensed someone approaching. Ah, the register. Sorry. I turned around hurriedly, and there stood my father-in-law, dressed in a suit despite the late hour. "You've been working part-time, Father." He had assumed that my frequent nighttime outings were because I had a new lover, but that was not the case. It seems he misunderstood that I was keeping a new relationship secret. He had dressed in a suit and followed me, intending to plead with the person he thought was making me happy, saying, "Please make Stella happy." When I responded, "I still love him," my father-in-law murmured with a voice mixed with joy and sadness, "I see." He then asked the question I expected. "Why are you working at night? Aren't you making enough money? You work during the day too." When I hesitated, he pressed further with more questions. I had kept my late-night job a secret from both of them. If I told them, they would ask why, and that would lead to explaining the issues with my mother-in-law. So, I had been moving cautiously while my in-laws slept, but I was surprised they knew. Realizing I couldn't keep it hidden any longer, I took out my smartphone from my pocket and showed him the video. I confessed everything to my father-in-law. When it started, how frequently, and how much money had been stolen. I also mentioned that it might be due to the loneliness of losing their son. My father-in-law listened in silence and eventually said with difficulty, "I've caused trouble." "It's okay, we're all suffering," I replied. We were blessed with such a wonderful daughter-in-law, and to almost lose her so quickly. "Truly, truly foolish," my father-in-law said, tears tracing his cheeks. I couldn't hold back. Tears threatened to fall, despite being at work. "Father, the coffee here is really good. Would you like to try some? I'm about to take a break. Would you join me?" I invited him. "Yes, that would be nice," he replied, turning away to wipe his eyes with his sleeve. We sat close together at the bicycle parking area of the store, drinking coffee. The sky was clear, and the night was beautiful. The full moon brightly lit the darkness. Don't you think the winter night sky is the most beautiful? It's because the air is crisp, right? I said. Exactly. That's why we should go camping during the winter break. To a place where the stars are beautiful. He suggested. It's a plan my husband would have made. All right, I'll look up some places, I responded. It was a plan we both would have enjoyed. But my husband was surely enjoying the most beautiful starry sky from the best seat in heaven. With that thought, I looked up at the sky. Then, suddenly, what my father-in-law exclaimed in surprise. Following his gaze, I saw my mother-in-law. Moreover, she was walking cheerfully with an unfamiliar man. Are they walking arm in arm? Quiet. Let's go back to the store right away. Oh yes. It was definitely something we weren't supposed to see. My heart started beating rapidly. Not 100%, but 200% there was an atmosphere suggesting an improper relationship. My father-in-law seemed to sense it too, his expression stern. They were not only arm in arm, but almost as if they were about to kiss, walking very closely. It turns out, you weren't the only one going out late at night. What? My wife couldn't sleep either, thinking of her son, and was also going out at night. I felt she couldn't escape that sorrow either, so I let her be. He paused, struggling for words. But maybe it's a misunderstanding. Perhaps she just met an acquaintance while walking. I was disappointed with my weak attempt to cover it up. Still, my father-in-law showed his gratitude with a thank you and a smile. The atmosphere became even more awkward, and the store's cheerful background music seemed to make the situation worse. Unable to say anything appropriate and feeling disturbed, my father-in-law suddenly muttered something else. I see, that's what it is, he nodded, as if he had understood something. However, I still felt left out, unable to grasp the situation. I stared back at my father-in-law, filled with questions. Stella, let's keep what happened tonight between us, and not tell my wife. I'll handle this issue, and if my wife takes your money again, please let me know secretly. Yes, I understand. Don't worry about anything, Stella, he said firmly, patting my head gently. One Sunday, a few weeks later, after lunch, he said, There's something I need to discuss. Stella, please join us as a witness. What's wrong? Making such a scary face, my mother-in-law said. My father-in-law waited for me and my mother-in-law to sit down, then took several documents out of a brown A4 envelope and spread them on the table. My mother-in-law quickly grabbed one of the sheets. It was a large photo of her and a man entering a hotel. My father-in-law had hired a detective to investigate my mother-in-law's actions. Do you still go out with him? My mother-in-law just stared back at him with hatred, not answering. What do you mean by still? Despite thinking it might be inappropriate, my curiosity won out, and I asked. My father-in-law was silent for a while before he quietly began to recount past events. Actually, this was before our son was born, my father-in-law began. Right after marrying my father-in-law, My mother-in-law succumbed to external temptations. The man we saw at the store was the one involved at that time. My mother-in-law and that man were high school classmates, and they reconnected at a reunion. They were close since high school and confessed to each other that they had actually had feelings for each other back then. Although my mother-in-law was already married, he was single and attractive. According to my father-in-law, she thought that with no children, it was the perfect opportunity to switch partners. However, there was a problem with that man. It was his lack of prospects. He was handsome and dreamed of becoming famous as an actor on television, even starting his own theater troupe. However, there were hardly any members, and most of the performances were one-man shows done by him alone. After wrestling between reality and ideals, my mother-in-law chose the stable life guaranteed by my plain-looking father-in-law over the impractical dreams of her former classmate, abandoning the idea of eloping with him. But ultimately, my mother-in-law couldn't make a decision and continued a double life between my father-in-law and that man. At that time, I was overwhelmed with work and didn't notice what was happening at home. My father-in-law said with a sigh, giving my mother-in-law a cold look. He realized my mother-in-law's affair when there was a possibility that she could be pregnant. Even when I heard she might be pregnant, she didn't seem genuinely happy. I became suspicious, investigated, and discovered she had been involved with that man. "But our son is really yours," truly my mother-in-law exclaimed desperately. She had pleaded the same in the past, promising she would never meet that man again, that she would break up immediately, and that she wanted to build a home together with my father-in-law. My father-in-law believed her words and forgave her. He thought it was just a temporary fling, but it was actually a much more serious relationship. When we saw them at the store, it made sense why my father-in-law's expression turned so stern. "And to think you've continued this relationship all along, it's truly disgraceful." "No, that's not true." "But your relationship seemed like that of a couple who had been together for years," my father-in-law exclaimed, slamming the report on the table. The undeniable evidence was now clear. Like a gazelle attacked by a lion, my mother-in-law still tried to argue, though she looked downcast. "It's true. I'm not lying. I hadn't been in touch with him at all. I didn't even know his contact information." "But why were you together then?" my father-in-law pressed. "He came to our son's funeral," my mother-in-law answered. What my father-in-law exclaimed in surprise. "Perhaps you called him because he's the real father." "That's not true. Our child is really yours. He just came for the funeral." "I see." "Really, I was just lonely. After our son died, I just wanted to see him again. But I didn't know his contact, so I looked up his stage name on the internet and found the email address of his theater troupe." "So, you started seeing each other again?" "Because I couldn't help it. I was tormented by our son's memory. I wanted to be free too. Stella, you understand, don't you?" my mother-in-law pleaded. I was speechless, immobilized like a doll in front of my in-law's unknown past. How much had my husband known about this truth? Thinking of him made my heart ache. As my mother-in-law desperately continued to defend herself, my father-in-law just shook his head in disbelief. "No matter how plausible your story sounds, I won't fall for it anymore. I won't be deceived again," my father-in-law declared. "What do you mean by deceiving?" "I'm telling the truth," my mother-in-law protested. "Just lonely because our son is gone? Is that the real reason?" my father-in-law interrogated. "It's true. Why would you say that?" my mother-in-law retorted loudly. But my father-in-law calmly met her eyes. "Stella, the money stolen from your purse went to that man's drinking and gambling," my father-in-law said quietly. "What?" I was shocked. "Have you been funneling Stella's earnings to this man?" "I've thoroughly investigated it." My father-in-law pressed. "Have my earnings been going to your lover?" When I asked, my mother-in-law didn't respond, but her face said it all. That expression seemed to affirm the truth. "Stella knew you were stealing the money. Despite that, she thought you were suffering and showed consideration. Apologize to Stella." My father-in-law demanded. "I'm sorry." My mother-in-law apologized. Emotions overflowed. I couldn't stop the tears. I didn't even understand what kind of tears they were, but emotions were swirling uncontrollably inside me. "Moreover, you promised at the bar you frequent that you would marry him after I died," laughing about it. "You even said you would build a house with my retirement fund." My father-in-law added. "That must be a joke, right?" my mother-in-law said. I can't believe a parent who has lost a child would joke about a family member's death. My father-in-law raised his voice. There had been claims that my mother-in-law wished for my father-in-law's death. It was unbelievable. Unable to bear being there any longer, I rushed out of the living room and curled up in a corner of the hallway, desperately wiping away my unending tears. From beyond the hallway, I could hear my father-in-law's anguished voice through the living room door. "You must have been happy to see him after our son died. I don't want to see your face anymore. Leave right now," he yelled fiercely. Later they divorced. I don't know whether my mother-in-law is with that man. It no longer concerns me. My father-in-law returned the money my mother-in-law stole from me and said, "Don't worry, I will also collect compensation from her." But the amount I lost wasn't that much. "It's compensation for you, Stella, don't worry about it. Legally, you are my daughter," my father-in-law said with a laugh. His kindness always warmed my heart. "Can I stay here until I find a new love?" I asked. Of course, my father-in-law responded with a big smile. I wonder what my husband would think about this decision. Suddenly, such a question crossed my mind. "Hey Stella, can I ask you one thing? Don't you ever think there is no blood relation between me and my son? What do you actually think?" My father-in-law asked hesitantly. This must have been weighing on his mind for a long time. His face tensed with anxiety. He had raised his son alone, unable to confide in anyone. I looked him straight in the eye and answered lightly, "Oh, was that what you were worried about?" "That was," he replied. I couldn't help but laugh. "Of course, you are father and son. Remember what you said at the store, Stella, you don't have to worry about anything. Leave it all to me." His way of speaking and his actions are so much like yours. It's as if he was possessed by you. No doubt, you are a real father and son. I guarantee it. Hearing those words, my father-in-law started to cry, his emotions collapsing. "Thank you. Really, thank you." I gently rubbed his back, quietly saying, Father, thank you for raising him so wonderfully." At that moment, my father-in-law took my hand and squeezed it tightly. His hand was as warm as his son's,